So, to let you all know, this panel is being recorded, and panel C is titled Playing with the Boundaries of Girlhood. And so, my name is Aqua Jerlyn Morel, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Florida. And so, I will be introducing our panelists. So, first, we have Fallon Matthews, she, her pronouns, is an Afro-Latino demigirl pursuing an interdisciplinary doctorate at Dalhousie University. And their paper is titled Redefining Girlhood, Semiotics, and Aesthetics in Just Another Girl on the IRT and the Intersection with Demigirl Identity. And then we have Courtney Payne, who is a senior majoring in sociology and anthropology with a public health minor from Atlanta, Georgia. And the title of their paper is The Girl with the Medusa Tattoo. We have Catherine Phelps, who has a doctorate in sociology from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and is teaching faculty in the Gender and Women's Studies Department at UW-Madison. And the title of their paper is Fat Girl Futures, Disrupting Normative Discontent in Mother-Daughter Relationships. And then we have Nat Urban, they, them pronouns, is a queer studies researcher located in Los Angeles, California, with a focus on trans studies, histories of sexuality, and queer culture. And the title of their paper is Playing with Dead Things, Ethnographies of Queer Girlhood. And so, Fallon Matthews.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so I will move this slideshow. Okay, can everybody see that? All right. Okay, cool. So basically when I submitted to this conference, what I took to mean in terms of the theme about like the mundanity of girlhood and pleasure, play in the everyday, I thought about that for me, meaning delving into the ordinary yet profoundly impactful aspects of girlhood. Like, consider how girls' everyday lives are complex and porous. And thematic aspects of pleasure, play, and what we might liken to be mundane can offer insight on the significance of seemingly ordinary moments in shaping girls' lived experiences in broader sociopolitical respects. And that's how I came, or how and why I came to censor this presentation around a critical consideration of girlhood as a concept, and aiming to kind of redefine it through an in-depth analysis of semiotics and aesthetics within the context of Leslie Harris's film, Just Another Girl on the IRT, and examining the visual and symbolic elements present in the film, like use of imagery, language, cultural references. I'm seeking to kind of unpack the complexities of girlhood as portrayed and consider the intersectionality of girlhood with contemporary gender identities, particularly demigirl identity. And Just Another Girl on the IRT exemplifies the semiotics, the study, and for folks who don't know, semiotics pertains to the study of signs and symbols and their interpretation. And also looking at the aesthetics, which are the principles of beauty and artistic expression. And generically, this film does both for New Black Realism, the genre, which I'll define a bit more later, through its authentic portrayal of urban inner city life and the experiences of its characters. And it employs a raw and unfiltered visual style, which is characterized by handheld camera work and naturalistic lighting, which captures the gritty reality of the character's environment. And you see through the setting, urbanly and street vernacular and even hip hop, the film conveys a sense of place and community that is integral to the New Black Realism movement. And the aesthetic choices, the use of bold colors, contemporary fashion, and so forth contribute to its overall aesthetic and serve to contextualize the characters within the cultural landscape of the early 1990s Brooklyn. And these semiotic and aesthetic elements not only enhance the realism, but also imbue it with a sense of authenticity and cultural relevance that resonates to date. So, like Just Another Girl on the IRT, the film, It follows the story of Chantel Mitchell, a confident and ambitious African American teenager who lives in Brooklyn. And the film chronicles her aspirations, struggles, and conflicts as she navigates adolescence, relationships, pregnancy, and societal expectations, even as she's intelligent, determined, and independent. And this film was directed by Leslie Harris, who's also a female director, and it received critical acclaim for its authentic portrayal of inner city life in terms of its central female character. And since so thinking about this also, since films don't exist in a vacuum, I mean, nothing does. It's important to acknowledge the film's sociocultural context as a new Black realist film. The new Black realism movement emerged in the 1990s against the backdrop of sociopolitical upheaval, including the aftermath of countercultural movements and rights movements such as civil rights and Black power, and the rise of hip hop culture. And while new Black realism didn't have concrete objective, it ultimately challenged stereotypes and presented more authentic portrayals of African American life, which focused on lived experiences. And New Black Realism filmmakers sought to reclaim narratives about African American identity and culture, offering nuanced perspectives that countered mainstream stereotypes. And filmmakers associated with the movement include Spike Lee, remember Do the Right Thing and all of his other films, and John Singleton, famously for Boys in the Hood, and Mario Van Peebles for New Jack City. And noticeably, the predominant association here of these directors lacks female directors and narratively female protagonists, which is why I've really got to give it up to Leslie Harris. And like all films of the New Black Realism era, which revolved around themes of resilience, survival, and agency, Just Another Girl in the IRT depicted this in the context of girlhood. And this representation challenged mainstream representations of girlhood by presenting a more diverse and authentic portrayal of African American girls and young women respective to reproductive labor, which yields semiotics, effects, and aesthetics which prefer tools for analyzing the cultural meanings and representations associated with girlhood in film altogether. And these frameworks allow for a deeper understanding of how visual and symbolic elements convey messages about gender identity and power. And for me, this film imparts that by examining girlhood within the context of New Black Realism and through these analytical frameworks, we can uncover the complexities and nuances of girls' lived experiences within this particular positionality of being Black in the inner city, as well as challenging stereotypes that broaden our understanding of gender representation in film. So the visual and narrative elements, think about the dialogue, cinematography, and symbolism, contribute to a nuanced portrayal that goes, again, beyond simplistic monolithic representation. And Leslie Harris presents Chantel, the central character, a girl with depth, agency, and individuality. And she subverts stereotypes by depicting Chantel as a dynamic and ambitious person who refuses to conform to societal expectations imposed upon her based on race and gender and socioeconomic status. And rather than portraying Chantel as passive, victimized, or obliging men-read characters, the film emphasizes her capacity for self-determination. And generically, New Black Realism offered, again, this nuanced and authentic portrayal of experiences, including girlhood, within African American communities, which challenged mainstream tropes. And the genre to this day, although not as active, continues to provide insight into the intersecting factors that shape African American girls' lives, including race, class, and gender and sexuality. And just another note is like, even though American in this context denotes like the United States of America, I also kind of use it just to denote like the broader sense of the Americas, which include North America, South America, and Central America. So, yeah. And Leslie Harris's film here, it speaks to the genre's ability to shed light on agency and complexities of African American girls, to offer a more comprehensive understanding of girlhood that goes beyond that monolithic representation, which can include negative stereotypes that have a further historical context in terms of the archetypes of the sapphire and the mammy and so forth. And the narrative structure of this film centers on the experiences and perspective of an African American girl, which counters the dominant narratives that marginalize or exoticize Black girls' voices. And through its use of nonlinear storytelling and documentary style filmmaking, New Black Realism as a genre disrupts traditional cinematic conventions, which offers alternative ways of representing girlhood that are more inclusive. And Leslie Harris employs this documentary technique wherein Chantel routinely breaks the fourth wall, musing directly to the audience. And cultural products like artifacts from past decades, including films, play an important role in shaping our contemporary understandings of gender identity. Like Just Another Girl on the IRT provided this portrayal of girlhood that continues to resonate with me today. And older cultural productions have also just broadly contributed to societal attitudes and perceptions surrounding gender identity by introducing new concepts, terminology, and representations. And New Black Realism expanded the discourse on gender and race, which influenced contemporary discussions about intersectionality and identity. And a demigirl, like I identify as a demigirl, which I said earlier in this intro. But for folks who don't know, a demigirl is a gender identity that falls under the non-binary umbrella. Demigirls typically identify partially, but not entirely, as a girl or woman, while also feeling a connection to another gender identity or identities. And this means that while demigirls may feel a connection to femininity or aspects of being female, they also experience a sense of disconnect or partial identification with this gender. And the demi prefix indicates a partial or incomplete identification with the female gender. And it's also just key to note that each demigirl's experience and understanding of their gender may vary because, again, it's a personal and individual identity. And their gender identity is fluid and may vary over time or in different contexts. And I want to impart that the demigirl gender identity is distinct from other non-binary or binary girlhood identities due to its specific combination of feelings and experiences regarding gender through a partial identification with girlhood, fluidity and variability, and an intersection with other gender identities. Demigirls partially identify with the category of girlhood or womanhood, as I said before, and they can feel a connection to certain aspects of femininity. But this identification is not felt as strongly or consistently as it might be for someone who identifies fully as a girl or woman. And the demigirl identity also involves a degree of fluidity and variability in gender experiences. So while some demigirls may consistently identify as such, others might find that their sense of gender fluctuates over time and in different contexts. And this fluidity itself distinguishes demigirl identity from more static or fixed gender identities. And many demigirl individuals experience their gender identity in relation to other gender identities too. And this might involve feeling connection to another gender identity alongside demigirl identity or experiencing shifts in their gender expression that reflect different aspects of their identity at different times. And when I first watched Just Another Girl in the IRT, I identified with Chantel's navigation of gender expectations and the complexity of identity formation as a demigirl. And this portrayal of Chantel's defiance against societal norms and her struggle to assert her individuality resonates with my own experiences of negotiating gender identity within a society that often imposes rigid binaries of gender, respectability, and otherwise. And moreover, this era, early 90s, it was marked by androgynous wardrobe choices, which punctuates the subversion of traditional gender norms and expectations, which speaks to gender fluid fashion trends. And fashion media and popular culture play a crucial role in shaping perceptions of gender and identity, which often perpetuate narrow and exclusionary ideals of beauty and gender expression. And the sartorial choices in Just Another Girl in the IRT reflect the cultural ethos of the early 1990s, including the influence of particular culture and that androgynous fashion sense and youth subcultures. And beyond fashion, the film also resonates with my demigirl positionality through its exploration of identity, agency, and the complexities of navigating gender expectations through exploring identity itself. Like, Chantel grapples with questions of identity throughout the film. She questions societal expectations and forging her own path. In similarity, demigirls, myself included, experience that fluidity or ambiguity in their gender identities, navigating the gender binary categories of male and female. And her own journey of self discovery and assertion of her identity as a girl, noting the ascriptions of reproductive labor wholly in part of her gender positionality through, people expecting her to do caregiving tasks, interpersonality, and so forth. It resonated with me as a demigirl who also navigates likewise. Her interactions with her family and peers also highlight the ways in which gender norms and expectations shape her experiences of reproductive labor, such as expectations to conform to traditional roles of caregiving and nurturing. And like myself too, as a demigirl, I grapple with societal expectations related to femininity and womanhood in that context, including pressures related to reproductive roles and responsibilities. And her relationships with family, friends, and romantic interest involve various forms of interpersonal labor through emotional support and navigating that social dynamic. And as she asserts her agency and autonomy in various aspects of her life, from her academic pursuits to romantic relationships, this parallels how demigirls similarly assert agency in defining and expressing their genders. This determination to carve out one's own path despite societal pressures in literally everyday expressions, it it's
Good
like pretty
morning.
resonant. But yeah,
Good. How are you?
Hi,
is
Fallon. We
yeah.
With
we are
Oh,
at, and so I'm going to go ahead and stop you there, and then
yeah.
maybe at the end with Q&A, we may be able to you may be able to share your conclusion.
Oh
So
yeah,
next,
no, sorry. Yeah, that was it. Sorry, I wasn't
nope.
paying attention to the chat. But yeah, the last slide was just questions. So yeah.
Okay, and next we will have, thank you. Next we will have Courtney Payne.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and set up my timer. All right, is everyone able to hear me okay? Great, beautiful. And then I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen as well. All right, so get there. Okay. So it's sometimes a little tricky with so much going on. All right, everyone able to see? Beautiful. All right. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Courtney Payne. I am a graduating senior sociology and anthropology major, public health minor. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, attending Spelman College. And today I will be presenting my research titled The Girl with the Medusa Tattoo Sexuality, Radical Resistance, and Disrespectability at Spelman College. So I wanted to provide an overview of my presentation today, as well as an introduction to some of the basic components of my research. My research, again, is entitled The Girl with the Medusa Tattoo, Sexuality, Radical Resistance, and Disrespectability at Spelman College, and it studies Black queer womanhood at Spelman College. Within my project, I interviewed 9 Black queer students attending Spelman whose ages range from 18 to 22. So while they are not necessarily classified structurally as girls, the identification with girlhood, especially as you move throughout college, reclaiming your inner child, is something that is analyzed within interview themes that I will discuss later. My presentation today will follow the order listed on the screen. So we'll begin with an abstract, and then we'll end with an expression of gratitude for y'all listening to me today. So, integrating research interests in Black womanhood in higher education, my project, The Girl with the Medusa Tattoo, highlights Black queerness in its ruptures of respectable Black femininity through a present day analysis of students attending Spelman College, a private, all women HBCU. Within my research, I explore how Black women exemplify the intimate connection between scholarship, social justice, and sexuality as they redefine epistemology and create a subsector of Black queer scholarship. The large problem centered within my research is Black queer women from Ma Rainey to Josephine Baker to Audre Lorde, and contemporaries like Black Lives Matter founder Alicia Garza have paved the way for a myriad of sexualities to be represented as sources and resources for resistance to further Black liberation. However, being that Black queer bodies are seen outside of the realms of respectable femininity, they do not receive the acknowledgement and representation that they deserve. Particularly at Spelman College, respectability politics, which are embedded and embodied within the trope of the Spelman woman, have placed queer bodies at the margins of this Black feminist space that we come to know as Spelman, leaving little room for genuine representation with Spelman's overall culture of Black queer celebration. The Medusa tattoo reflects resistance in search of identity, and therefore the girls that figuratively have these tattoos or may not necessarily actually have these tattoos reflect the journey of pushing back against queer marginalization and respectability politics. Within my research, I asked, how do Black queer women and girls view their sexuality in relation to social justice and Black liberation? To answer this question, I've interviewed 10 Black queer students attending Spelman, whose ages range from 18 to 22. Over the course of the interview, we've discussed their views on the Spelman woman trope, as discussed beforehand, the importance of their sexual identity and sexuality and queer identity to their social justice pursuits, and lastly, how, if at all, their queer identity has shaped their Spelman experience. This research is informed largely by African American and gender studies and disciplines. Within my review of the literature, I utilized sources within these disciplines such as Rape in the Inner Lives of Black Women in the Middle West, Preliminary Thoughts on the Culture of Dissemblance by Darlene Clark Hine in No More Secrets, No More Lies, African American History and Compulsory Heterosexuality by Maddie Eudora Richardson. While related studies, such as Kendrick Coleman's The Difference Safe Spaces Make, have explored Black queer students' experiences at HBCUs, which are historically Black colleges and universities, there is a lack of scholarship that argues Black queer women's existence and Black queer girls' existence as the foundation for social liberation. For instance, while Coleman utilizes Black women's theories to argue the connection between liberation and safe spaces for queer students on HBCU campuses, his empirical data highlights instances pertaining solely to queer students at Morehouse College, a private all-male HBCU. Being so, I place African American and gender studies disciplines into conversation with one another by affirming Black queer women and girls as knowledge producers and signifying Spelman as a living repository for Black liberation. Understanding Black women and girls' identities as constantly developing with social activism, I utilize Black feminist theory and Black queer theories to articulate how Black queer Spelmanites define their sexual identities in relation to social justice, academic institutionality, and surrounding socio-political constructions. I place these theories into conversation with one another to encapsulate an analysis of social justice movements that are equipped to properly analyze Black, female, and queer identities with an ethic of care. So how all these identities come together on one singular body. This project seeks to understand how Black queer women use available resources, epistemology, and their lived experiences to highlight themselves within the fields of African American and gender studies. So there are 4 dominant themes that have emerged from my preliminary analysis. In the interest of time today, I will only discuss one theme. The unwritten rules theme, which is what I've deemed it as, emerges as interviewees express their understanding of Spelman's long history with respectability politics and promoting the ideal Spelman woman. So when they think of who they are attaining to be, what comes to mind and what has the college told them to attain? Or attribute their successes to. Some of these rules, include the expectation to speak, dress, or even act a certain way in social or classroom, as well as academic, maybe academic conferences settings. So in light of these unwritten rules, participants maintain an aura of caution around openly expressing their queerness to Spelman communities that are not specifically dedicated to uplifting queer voices. This is particularly exemplified by one participant as she notes that while she has never been made overtly uncomfortable about her sexuality at Spelman or her sexual identity at Spelman, she does not bring up her sexuality in classroom discussions. So the other themes that I have seen emerge within my interview process are the twofold consciousness, femininity struggles, and community building. So you may be thinking in the audience, I may not be Black and I may not be queer, and I also may not identify as a woman or a girl, so why should I care? The stake for all of us paying attention to Black queer womanhood is that Black queer women are crafting the way that we think about and fight against the oppression of Blackness through their sexuality, through their queerness. So think of Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks, but oftentimes they're asked to choose between being represented by only one of their intersecting identities. So asked to be represented as a race woman, or just a woman in general, or even just someone who is queer, and not as their identities all together. So since we're continuing to ask Black queer women to choose, we are furthering ourselves from true liberation. So as I wrap up today, I just want to say an expression of thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and also thank you to everyone who has supported me along the way as I've been crafting this research. If you're interested in speaking more to me about my research or about what I'm thinking about, what I found, I have listed my alumni email on this slide below because I will be transitioning from Spelman soon. So thank you so much for listening today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you, Courtney. So let me stop my timer and we'll restart it. Next, we have Kate.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. OG, for moderating. Thank you so much to Fallon and Courtney for your wonderful presentations thus far. I don't have, I'm not going to share my screen because I don't have slides to share. So I'm really hoping to have a dialogue and to get some feedback around this idea that is the beginning of what I hope is my next research project. So the title of this working paper is Fat Girl Futures, Disrupting Normative Discontent in Mother-Daughter Relationships. And I'm really wanting to think about how we can expand our ideas around what social construct around motherhood, around what it means to be a daughter, and sort of playing around with those identities. So what I'm offering today is some existing scholarship around this, some framing definitions, some ideas around methodology, and I'm really excited to get some feedback and to hear some questions. My areas of interest and research are in body politics and girlhood studies, in fat studies, and in particular, how we think about fat liberation, feminist theory, feminist pedagogies. For me, fat liberation work and fat scholarship has really shown up in the classroom. So I'm really excited to think about this in a context of a next research project. And I'm going to take a moment to shamelessly plug that my book is coming out at the beginning of next year on tween girl digital cultures. And I was so excited to see who our keynote speaker was, Dr. Ashley Green-Wade, whose work I use a great deal in my own framings in my book. So in thinking about these questions of fat girl futures, I'm really interested in thinking about how we can enjoin more significantly fat studies and girlhood studies to disrupt anti-fatness within girlhoods across different identities and intersections and embodiments, and how we could understand processes of girlhood and girlhood not as this stagnant, static subject identity and way of being, but something that is constituted in relation and as a construct, and what it would mean to bring a fat liberationist framework into that space, especially as it's important to emphasize this mutually constituted relationship between anti-fatness and anti-Blackness. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a little bit. I think I am someone that grew up identifying as fat and as a girl. I've always been a fat person, but reflecting on my experiences of fat girlhood have all at once been really sort of compelling as I look back at that subject position over time, and also quite painful, and reflecting on some relationships, in particular, and interactions with my own mother, and then how this has figured into conversations in the classroom as well. So I want to know more about how we might make it possible for girls to claim fat identities and to continue to claim fat identities, and how mothers might facilitate or mitigate coming into fat girlhood as a subject position, because we know empirically, and what the scholarship shows is that mothers have a profound impact on how daughters are thinking about themselves in relation to body image, in relation to a thin imperative. But I'm interested in how we might disrupt that and really bring a fat liberation framework to the fore. So what can this framework provide in disrupting this idea of normative discontent and social reproduction of thin idealism, and in particular in family settings where feminist sensibilities are being enacted? This is something I've found cultivated over and over again in conversations in classrooms and with various students, and just thinking about my own life and in conversation with friend networks and community groups, that even as mothers may be demonstrating, and intergenerationally speaking, that mothers may be demonstrating a lot of ideas around a feminist sensibility, that tyranny of slenderness is still so prevalent in how they are showing up in their sort of everyday embodiment narratives. So there's this, and I really want to be like, I don't like the idea of or that there's good ways of being a feminist and bad ways of being a feminist, and that indeed we should be thinking in expansion around what that means. But that this idea that the tyranny of slenderness and the thin imperative is so crucial to upholding gendered subjectivities. So I question even does it disrupt possibilities of even being understood as a girl and claiming that identity? So just to provide a little bit of framing around key terms, normative discontent is this idea and this recognition of a very gendered societal stereotype that, in particular, it is a very common, indeed normal thing for female, feminine, and femme presenting and identifying people to be dissatisfied with their bodies, and in particular with their weight. And this is widespread, and it's become so normalized that we have recognized discursive ideas around, we refer to this as like fat talk, in how, in particular, female, feminine, and femme identifying and presenting people are in relation with each other through these processes of like denigrating the body and engaging in negative self-talk. Certain popular surveys have suggested that young women and girls would rather be stupid, mean, or even dead than fat. And I think there is something really important in thinking about how fatness figures in conversations around being marked for dead. And there are many Black scholars in particular who are engaging that idea of anti-fatness as anti-Blackness, who are exploring that relationship. So I'll talk more about that in just a moment as well. Fat liberation as an idea is often used interchangeably with fat acceptance, but I think there are really important discursive differences there. That fat liberation it's inherently intersectional, it's interdisciplinary, it's feminist, it's anti-racist and anti-capitalist as a project that seeks to build coalition and be part of these other liberation efforts that we have recognized as being interlocking systems, and that they are mutually constituted, right? So in order to transform and radically restructure those systems, we have to reckon with fat liberation as a framework, because fat people have historically and contemporarily been viewed as a burden. There are ongoing projects of eradication, and have in many ways been meaningfully denied rights to exist in society. And this is meaningfully felt in different ways related to different intersections and intersecting identities. So in this, in what I view as it's an insidious time. It's a hard time for fat people right now. There's so much going on with the emphasis on the GLP-1 drug class, in sort of shifting rhetoric around fat being something that's not your fault. But I mean, still situating it squarely as like, this is a problem that requires a solution, and that fat embodiment is not a valid form of embodiment. So in this really, I think, insidious twist, we have very visible emphasis, in particular on social media, of this idea of body positivity, which has been co-opted, it's been sold, and primarily by thin and mid-size white cis women as this sort of category of existence and being. But what fat liberation does and must do is continually center experiences of fat people who have been multiply marginalized and disenfranchised, and who are understood as fat across time and space, and so have experienced acute oppression individually, interpersonally, and institutionally. I really want to emphasize the work of fat liberation scholars and theorists who are doing really exciting work in reframing curriculum, in bringing forth these ideas of fat liberation, in particular, the people at the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health, the people at the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. But I would, just in doing some lit review around this project and how I'm seeing it, fat liberation has not in a grand way been applied to ideas of the family or kinship structures, and more to the point, this mother-daughter construct social dyad. And this is where so much thin idealism is being policed, surveyed, reproduced, reconstituted. And I'm really fascinated with the question of, as in particular, girls who are doing more virtual engagement, who are participating on social media, who have been exposed to ideas of fat liberation in particular, and recognizing it as part of a larger question of systemic interlocking oppressions, of like what's possible in like exchange of knowledge, and this becoming a didactic relationship. In other words, like conversations and dialogues that I've had with my own mother about disrupting some of these ideas of healthism and the thin imperative, and that health is entirely the responsibility of an individual person. And indeed, if we are not engaged in health-seeking behaviors, that renders us morally suspect, and fat people in particular. Fat embodiment remains a very morally suspect state of being, and this is not separate from understandings of anti-Blackness, And I want to emphasize the work of Sabrina Strings and Deshawn Harrison and Hunter Ashley Shackelford and Mikey Mercedes and the people that have been doing and bringing this to the fore over the last handful of years, as just like a really, really important framing as we think about liberated futures for girls. So I teach a class on fat studies in the Gender and Women's Studies department at UW-Madison. And these conversations are continually arising through discourse between mothers and self-identified daughters around beauty work and self-surveillance and normative discontent and personal responsibility and thin idealism, even as those mothers and daughters situate themselves as vocally feminist and politically feminist. So in that way, fat liberation has not been really understood in relation to anti-racist work and work surrounding anti-Blackness and Black liberated futures. I could talk about it forever, right? But it's fun to bring this into conversation, and I'm really looking forward to what folks have to offer. Let me think about what. Okay, so in terms of questions that I have and what I might want to do with this, I'm really interested to hear from audience members. I know there's a lot going on here, but in this way, I feel that fat liberation is crucial moving forward as we think about liberated futures for girls across subject identities, because that tyranny of slenderness is still so prevalent in how we attribute worth to girls' bodies, and that in order to be understood as an ideal girl, this is deeply enmeshed with white supremacy and thin idealism and capitalism. Like, indeed, we love girls as consumers. We do not love girls as active political subjects. So I welcome ideas around this. I'm thinking about different methodologies. This is feeling very much a qualitative but a multi-method project. I'm curious about what folks think in terms of how we might go about answering these questions around unpacking more of that mother-daughter relationship and what bringing a fat liberation framework into questions of girlhood studies might mean, in particular through exploring that relationship. So I will stop there. Thank you all so much. And thank you for your time. And I look forward to some Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. See my DM that I sent about the questions, so others can see, even though we didn't have a visual, they'll know what questions that you're referring to. All right, so next we have Nat.
Howdy, I am going to share my screen. All right, and share the sound. All right. So before I get started, I wanted to just say a big thank you to the Girl Museum for sponsoring this project and hosting this project. I'm an independent scholar, so I was a little worried about running an interview series without any sort of institutional support, and they took me on, and I continue to be super duper appreciative of that. So yeah, playing with dead things, ethnographies of girlhood. I came to this project from my own feelings of girlhood. Hold on, there's a chat. Yay! So I am really, I no longer identify as a girl, right? I've kind of left binary identities behind. But in, working through my own queerness, I found that my younger self is still a little girl. I remember the first time my therapist asked me about my inner self, and he paused. He was like, does she use she, her pronouns? And I had to sit with it and think about it. And I was like, you know what? Like, yeah, she does. And that's interesting. Like, how is she still a little girl? And so I, as a researcher, naturally, whenever I have a question, I go do some reading. And I ran into Marnina Gonick's article where she asks the question, are queer girls girls? And that's kind of in the interest of complicating and creating a more complex category of girl. And it stuck with me a lot. I spent a lot of my girlhood feeling very monstrous, and hiding signs of queerness and fear of like violence. So are queer girls girls, whether or not it is proper or real to be a queer girl, there are people inhabiting that existence, right? Like this comes from trans ideas of identity, of whether or not you are being granted access to that category by society, you can still inhabit it. So in that case, what does it mean to experience a queer girlhood? What is girlhood if it is not an age range, if it's not a genital configuration, if it is not in relationship to man, patriarchy, and boyhood, right? So my methodologies, this is an ethnography project. I knew what I thought, but embodiment is a really important principle to me, which is this idea that we all have our own individual ideas of what girlhood means to us. And so I wanted to kind of get a feel of the field. I hold a singular identity, and I was really curious about trans girlhoods. I was curious about who has chosen to leave girlhood and who has chosen to come to it, right? So I did an open call for interviews through the Girl Museum. We used their social media, and as part of that call, I made sure to include whatever girlhood means to you. I also did some direct reach out to people in my life who I know have interesting relationships with girlhood. That was really gratifying. It's really gratifying to bring the people you love into the archive. I'm actually really emotional about it still, of like these people that I love have a permanent place in the archive now. For our interview questions, I had everybody fill out a form who wanted to be interviewed to kind of get a feel of making sure I hit a lot of different areas and get a very wide breadth of experience. So I kind of built off of what folks said in that. And then as far as goals for the interviews, my goal was to let people tell their stories. And I really emphasized that to everyone I spoke with, of like, this is your interview. We have this topic, but if there's something you want to talk about, like, we will talk about it. And they had, full veto power over everything that got published. So yeah, my 6 interviewees, I had Emily, Vic, Morgan, Percy, Andy, and Adrienne. We have a huge breadth of identity here. We have folks who identify as non-binary. We have folks who identify as transmasculine. We have folks who identify as cis and queer. We have trans women. So we really, really did hit this big breadth that I'm really excited about. So what we're going to do is I have a short, like 30-second clip from each interview. These interviews are like an hour long each. So we're not going to get to talk about everything. When I started looking through my interviews, I drowned in information, which is a wonderful feeling. It is so nice to drown in information. But it also made it hard to squish into 15 minutes. All righty. So this first quote comes from my interview with Emily. Emily is an illustrator and a flight attendant, and identifies as queer, and is working through their gender identity. Where they're at right now, it feels weird. And so we were talking about kind of media that they enjoy, and seeing gendered examples in media. And they were talking about cosplay, and wanting to cosplay different characters and have access to different forms of identification. So I'm going to go ahead and play this clip for us.
But I loved all of those things, and I was so frustrated with people telling me, no, you can only be one thing, you can only like one type of thing, you can't, like, it's unusual, and that frustrated me so much. So, and just, I think a lot of those feelings had to do with how society treats femininity in general. So I think being subjected at an early age to obvious misogyny, made me feel like I don't want to be subjected to this.
Yeah.
And I knew that no matter what I do, I'm going to be subjected to this. So
So what Emily's talking about there is they were harassed a lot as a young girl, sexually harassed as walking down the street. And so they took on, the attempt to subvert the norm of girl. They tried. They were like, you know what? I'm gonna, get a piercing and dye my hair so that they'll leave me alone. And what she found was that, like, even as she attempted to subvert that norm, because girl is seen as something kind of owned by patriarchy, right? And she couldn't get out because she was seen as a commodity. And that was really frustrating and kind of part of where this disconnect to femininity came from, of where all of these people are going to have these big assumptions about me and decide who I am and not see me as a person. They see me as an object that they can own, right? So this next quote comes from my interview with Vic. Vic is a screenwriter or a playwright and an actor, and he is trans masculine. And we were talking about, his build and like, what does it mean to, be raised a girl and then leave it and come to boyhood essentially. So we'll go ahead and play this clip.
Because I wanted to be high femme and I wanted to be kitchen, I wanted to be camp.
I love it.
And it's like that wouldn't have been granted to me if I was a little boy. And yeah, like this build that I have now, this is what I want. I cannot imagine having any other, build. And like genuinely, I get really emotional sometimes thinking about the girl that I grew up being, because like she had some stuff to figure out, but she was trying real hard. And like I in the last couple of years.
I adore this clip. I think my favorite thing about it is the way that it subverts the wrong body narrative, or this idea of like false embodiment that we see a lot when talking about trans folks, of this idea of being born into the wrong body, and that, the only way to change your gender is to completely realign yourself in a perfect box. And what Vic is talking about here is this subversion and like this dedication to true embodiment of, like the things that were granted to me in girlhood were important to me, and they made me who I am, and that doesn't negate any of the realness of who I am now or who I was then. And that's so important, and I love that it lets embodiment be kind of playful and a thing that lets you access all kinds of different stuff. Alrighty, so then this next clip comes from my interview with Morgan. Morgan is a researcher as well, and she researches girls in like girl literature, so things like the Babysitters Club. And we were talking about growing up. Something that was really important to me, that felt important to girlhood, was relationships between girls, specifically relationships between girls when there are no adults or boys around, this kind of secrecy. And yeah, so let's go ahead and listen to this clip.
There's nothing that can really replicate that. And again, behind closed doors, it was like makeup, it was gossiping, it was like, what do you think it'd be like to be kissed? Or like, sometimes it'd be really bold and like, like, oh, I wonder if he has a big penis. Like, we had no frame of reference. Like, you had no idea what any of that meant, but it was just like we were so growing up. Or like, we'd watch a movie and like be like, what do you think that would be like? Or, it was just sort of like the working through ideas and talking them through with someone that like, those kind of like weird questions that we all have, but we don't want to ask out loud because it's like, what a weirdo, but like I had my best friends to ask those questions too. So.
I love this clip. It's really thinking about like those relationships between girls, which are very close. There's a lot of research about like romantic relationships in girlhood, looking into the history of chumming and schoolgirl romance, and thinking about how like it lets us experiment, it lets us try things on. And I found that this showed up a lot in my interviews, and this idea of experimenting and trying things on. And it ended up being something that, as I redefined girlhood for myself, was really integral to that. My next clip comes from Percy. You'll remember earlier we talked about being a demi-girl in the first presentation. Percy as well identifies as a demi-girl, and I was asking them about, the choice to stay affiliated essentially with girlhood in choosing the label demi-girl. So let's go ahead and listen to this clip.
I still present very femininely and engage in a lot of feminine things, like dressing nice, dressing very like high femme, and I do feel tied to certain aspects of femininity, not necessarily in a girlish way per se, but the aspects of femininity that I feel more closely tied to are like I guess like Black Widow, Jessica Rabbit type archetype of like very high femme, can and will kill you. Yeah. So I do still feel tied to those aspects, but not all of them, I suppose. Oh.
This is something that came up a lot as well, this idea of like being more drama than woman, more character than woman. A lot of, especially like Vic, when I talked to him about his experiences in the theater, this idea of like, I want to play characters that are more drama than woman came up a lot, which was really interesting. This next clip comes from my friend Andy. They are a poet, an incredible poet who writes about girlhood often. And here we're talking about what happens after you kind of break out of girlhood.
Real joy in like being out of that box, doing the really hard work of breaking it, and then coming out the other side and being like, well, I am still like a beautiful feminine person, and like all the things I loved about myself as a girl are still true. They're just like free. I can just go wherever I want with that energy. And like, yeah, so I feel like the process of breaking down girlhood is like, you know, you rip through it, and then you come out the other side and it's not holding you back anymore. It's just there.
I love this clip. We're going to come back to this in a minute. Thinking about girlhood as a liminal space that can be accessed. And what I really love about this is like this breaking of girlhood, what's left over is something you can choose to access, right? So this last clip comes from Adrienne, who is a trans woman who works as a therapist with domestic violence victims, talking about what it means to be her own creator and come to girlhood on purpose.
Because when I approach femininity, I approach it very intentionally. It's about compassion. It's about connection. It's about empathy. It's about showing up from those traditionally feminized roles of care and nurturance. And how do I embody that intentionally? Not just the forced into this box because the patriarchy says you have to be a servant to men and children and culture, but I choose to be a healer. And that's been very empowering. It's been very affirming gender-wise too. I think being my own creator has been really powerful as a trans person, as a trans woman, because I get to choose the pieces of gender that I like, and I get to leave everything else behind. I don't want to be.
Alrighty, so girlhood as kind of where I ended up with all these incredible interviews is kind of thinking of girlhood as a dead thing, something that me personally, I've broken out of, I've broken. And because it's a dead culture almost for me, I'm able to kind of go back and like pick up the pieces that are important to me, like Adrienne said, and like Andy said, of being able to come back to it and kind of pick up pieces and examine them, as well as a liminal space, kind of breaking down the idea of identity as something that is knowable and fixed. Think about Riley Snorton in Black on Both Sides, about, think about it instead as a liminal space that anyone can access, right? Like girlhood is something anyone can access, whether or not they have ever considered themselves or been considered a girl. I think of it as a way of connecting, a way of forming relationships, and also an experiment and breaking the rules, a place to try things on and get to know yourself. So yeah.
We are
yes.
at time.
I'm at time. Thank you so much. Special thanks to the Girl Museum again. And there's my email on screen if you have any questions.
All righty. Thank you, everyone. Where's the reaction thingy? Here we go. Claps to all of our panelists. And so now we have 15 minutes open for Q&A. I ask that you write your questions in the chat That's one option. The second option is to raise your hand using the reaction video, and then I will call on you to unmute yourself just so we don't have multiple people unmuting themselves at the same time. So the floor is open. Shauna, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. You're muted.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for these amazing talks. So this comment is for Kate. I read your questions in the chat, and I wanted to offer maybe some kind of a thought about this mother-daughter dyad. As a mom, I admit that when I hear people talking about mothers, you know, in this dyadic formation with daughters, I don't know, it feels a little bit hard because mothers are also just discursively produced people who kind of exist in the same sociocultural context as daughters. Like we've all been impacted by thin culture, by all the things that you talked about. And so I wonder if there isn't a way to think about it beyond the dyad. And I'm thinking of a kind of a de-individuation of mothers and daughters and seeing them more as enmeshed or ensconced in a social world or a culture. I'm sure you're already thinking about all of this, but just the word dyad kind of catches me a bit. And I'm thinking that kind of takes them out of society and culture and makes them this really distinct, separate entity to be studied in isolation. And I'm wondering what you feel about, you know, broadening that perspective so that mothers and daughters really just are part of broader sociocultural contexts in a way that doesn't blame the mothers per se, but like sees the mothers as part of the same social construction in that thinness narrative. Thank you.
Absolutely, Shauna. And thank you so much. And I've never met you, but I've been using your work for a very long time. So this is very exciting to be in space with you. And that is so helpful in disrupting this idea of the dyad. And indeed, I mean it. And I think this comes with that dialogue of how mothers have been constructed and situated as feeders, as nurturers, and also how they model behavior in a context of parenting children, but also then how that translates to like beyond the home. So this question of expansion, I think, is so important. And wanting to think, I mean, indeed, a mother is enmeshed and constituted through that like it doesn't exist at all. I mean, even physiologically, we only attach meaning to it. So really wanting to dig into how this is a meshed relationship, how these identities are understood only insofar as that they are created co-constituently. And I'm really interested in this idea of reciprocity, of what mothers demonstrate to daughters and what that didactic relationship is, but then daughters coming to new information and different information, to peers and changing technological channels and media, and what that means in reciprocity for how we can disrupt this thin imperative, which has been so difficult, even as we enact so many conversations around liberation. Fat liberation has not been a part of that, not yet, in any like really meaningful way. So that's so helpful, and it just makes me want to start writing a lit review of like the sociocultural positioning of mother-daughter relationship. So
And
thank you.
Kate, I love your response. And all I want to say is that moms are messed up too, and that we struggle. That's
I'm
all.
a mom too.
That's the whole point, is that we're not those you understand the comment really is that we're part of the same issue that our daughters, and in many ways our daughters are, and I don't want to generalize, but my daughter, who's on the other side of this wall, she's sort of a little bit more advanced than me. And I think this is part of social media, part of being part of a fourth wave, part of feminism trickling through our house, because that's the context that we live in here. But she seems to have a narrative that is a little bit, I don't know, like better than mine. She seems to understand bodies differently. So there's a little bit of hope there too, maybe. Anyway, thank you.
Oh, and I just, last thing, I'm a mom as well, and I have a 4.5-year-old daughter, and it's just, it's something. So maybe a place to begin is to really meditate on that experience a little bit. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna, for your question, and Kate, your response. Next, we have Amanda.
Hi, thanks. This is fabulous. Really, all of the presentations are. This is just a follow-up on the last comment about like daughters and fatness. Shauna, I have a 22-year-old, and I wish she were ahead of me. I keep, in our very feminist, queer feminist household, I keep trying to kind of like enlist her in a kind of feminist, like, body positivity, fat positive perspective, one that I've drawn on. And she just resists it. It's like she just doesn't want to claim the label. And it almost made me think about like fatness being a little like class, like, where like it's hard to really connect with and identify a sort of working class in the United States, because working class people always, are encouraged to think of themselves as like imminently middle class, right? So it feels a little like that with like the fatness label, that, folks have to be comfortable actually claiming it and not seeing it as just like a liminal space on the way to something preferable, right? Like, my daughter gained a ton of weight from medication during the pandemic, and she's changed medication and all of that, but the weight's not going away. And she is still in this like denial, just like 4 years later or 3 years later. And I'm like, how about some like fat studies? Like, how about we like lean into this? And she's just like, you think I'm fat? And I'm like, oh, right. So it's a slippery one for sure.
Thank you, Amanda.
Kate, you were going to end.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for the follow-up and for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, there wasn't exactly a question in there. I wonder whether the class, does class figure into the work that you're doing?
You bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can't talk about fat embodiment without bringing like the socioeconomic, yeah, totally. Yeah.
And then we have Fallon.
I just wanted to like add to that in terms of motherhood and fatness and body positivity and feminism. I just recall, I don't know if it might be a point of interest, but have people here seen Imitation of Life, the movie? So a part of the movie, like there's a woman, like there's a girl who is Norma Jean, and she's light skinned, and her mom is visibly black and dark skinned. And the movie is basically her, like Norma Jean, kind of like downplaying or denying her mom, because this movie takes place like in the 50s and so forth, and Norma Jean is convinced with passing and so forth. But the scene that stuck out to me at the beginning of the movie is when we're first introduced to Norma Jean and her mom, and a white woman approaches her mom and is like, "Oh, she's so nice. Like, how long have you been looking after her?" And then her mom replies, "Ever since she was born," to convey that like this is her daughter. She's not like a nanny or something. And it occurred to me because my mom, who was like prominently like darker skinned than me, has gotten similar feedback ever since I was a baby. And I often think about how that impacted like her identity in terms of like being seen as a mom, when like you see like a bunch of people kind of undermining it or questioning it or denying it altogether. And I think about how even to this day I could go to places with her and people will like look at us in disbelief. And even recently when I applied for a job, it was a horrible job. But anyways, the chair was just like, "Oh, Fallon, can you remind us how you're Black again?" And so yeah, I was just thinking about that in terms of motherhood. Like maybe that could be a point of interest in thinking of how mothers and daughters connect against the grain of that mainstream like questioning or denial, and how that also affects like self-concept, including body image, because my mom has always been relatively body positive, and she herself influenced my own gender identity because she was a single mom, and I'd often see her doing tasks that were ascribed or associated with like male labor and wearing clothes and so forth. So I think that obviously positively correlated to me. But yeah, I just thought that might be interesting. I don't know if people here have had experience with that as mothers, or just noting like how that might unnerve maternity in terms of people questioning it or undermining it in that way. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Fallon. And I would also add to that too, exploring, sorry if you hear my dog barking, exploring what internalized fat phobia looks like. And so I'm from the Dutch West Indies, and my mom is from the Hispanophone Caribbean, and born, raised, but my father raised me, and I was born here, or I was born in the Dutch West Indies, and I came to the States when I was 4. And so she always told me, I mean, I've always been like a chubby child. And she would always tell me, "Oh, don't become fat like those American women know." And I was like, interesting, yet you are also fat. And so in my mind, as her daughter, and we don't have a good relationship, but there's a lot of layers here. But in me trying to figure out as a fat person, child, teenager, young adult, my mother telling me that, but me trying to understand what fat like an American woman is in comparison to my mother, who is a Black Latina, who is also Hispanic. And I'm just like, I don't know what you mean, because you are fat, and I don't know. So yeah, so just the idea of internalized fat phobia. And then also what I messaged you as far as the social construction, and influence of how we view bodies, and the word fat and fatness, but that being an explanation for how mothers respond to their daughters, but not an excuse. And so how do we dismantle these ideas that we have also adopted, whether subconsciously or consciously? So yeah, we have 2 more minutes. Oh, I see. So I see Palak has raised their hand.
Hi. First of all, thank you for the insightful discussion. Everyone was very nice. I don't know how would it help you, but the thing is, when somebody tells me that you are fat or you are short, it's okay, I'm happy with it. It is rather for me, it is more of a content than the context. So I am here to do what I want to do. The external factors might not affect me internally or personally. It's my belief, what I believe. I'm just saying this because I believe that I am here to do something that I want to do. And if people are saying me something, they are behind my back, so let them be there, right? So I don't know how this helps you, but this is the way I carry on my day-to-day life, thinking something that is positive. People have told fat and short, fat plus short. So, heading though that life for some 30, 40 years, it was very tedious, but I just left the baggage behind, saying I am happy with my body. I am just going ahead with it. And I hope you people also find something like that, and stay positive and stay happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Palak. And we are at time, but I do want to quickly read Ava's response in the chat. So one, just wanted to say I love Nat's talk and would love to see more of their work. Second, on the mother-daughter topic, as someone who has been thin or mid-sized my whole life and had eating disorders growing up with a fat and internalized and externalized fat phobic, constantly dieting mother, me trying to help her move through that into even just body acceptance played a huge part into how I was raised as a parentified child and is a huge source of pain between us. Her using me for emotional regulation, etc. Hearing the idea of hope that daughters can help their mothers just made me cringe painfully a bit. And so Nat put in the chat um, the website for Girl Museum to see more of their work. And thank you all for joining us. Please feel free to reach out to the panelists and find their contact information to be in conversation with them. Thank you all.